Marcus Chen pushed his cleaning cart down the gleaming corridors of the Galactic Defense Station Omega-7. The massive space station orbited the outer rim of human territory, serving as the first line of defense against potential threats from unknown sectors. Despite being one of the most advanced military installations in the galaxy, someone still needed to keep it clean. The human janitor had worked these halls for 3 years now. He moved quietly, efficiently, his practiced hands guiding the automated cleaning systems with precision. Most of the alien soldiers barely noticed him. To them, he was just another maintenance worker, invisible and unimportant. Marcus preferred it that way. He had his reasons for choosing this job, reasons he kept to himself. The pay was decent, the work was honest, and it gave him something he desperately needed: purpose after losing everything that mattered to him. The corridor he cleaned now housed the barracks for the Zephyrian assault troops. These 7-foot-tall reptilian warriors were considered among the fiercest fighters in the Galactic Alliance. Their scaled skin could deflect most energy weapons, and their natural aggression made them perfect shock troopers. They were also notoriously arrogant. As Marcus worked near their common area, he could hear their loud conversations. The universal translators built into the station's systems automatically converted their hissing language into words he could understand. They were discussing their latest training scores, boasting about their combat prowess, and generally doing what soldiers everywhere did when they had downtime. Commander Escatar emerged from the barracks, his crimson scales marking him as a high-ranking officer among his kind. The Zephyrian stood nearly 8 feet tall, his muscular frame covered in battle scars that told stories of countless conflicts. His yellow eyes swept the corridor with the casual arrogance of someone who had never met an equal in combat. Those eyes landed on Marcus, who was carefully cleaning a section of wall paneling. The human didn't look up from his work, but he was aware of the alien's attention. In his peripheral vision, Marcus could see other Zephyrian soldiers gathering behind their commander, drawn by some unspoken tension in the air. "Human," Skatar called out, his voice carrying the natural rasp of his species. "You there with the cleaning supplies?" Marcus straightened up slowly, turning to face the alien commander. He had learned long ago that ignoring these situations only made them worse. "Yes, sir." Skatar's scaled lips pulled back in what might have been a smile, revealing rows of sharp teeth. "I am curious about something. The humans on this station, the soldiers, they train hard and follow orders. But you..." He gestured dismissively at Marcus's cleaning cart. "You push a cart and scrub floors? Tell me, were you simply born without the warrior spirit of your species?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Marcus could feel the weight of dozens of alien eyes watching him, waiting for his response. Some of the other species on the station had stopped their activities to observe the confrontation. Word traveled fast in the confined space of a military installation. "I clean because someone needs to," Marcus replied calmly. "Just like you fight because someone needs to." Skatar's eyes narrowed. "You compare your menial labor to the noble art of warfare? I have conquered 17 worlds for the Alliance. I have led charges against enemies that would make grown humans weep in terror. And you clean up after your betters." Marcus remained silent, but something flickered in his dark eyes. He had dealt with bullies before, both human and alien. The pattern was always the same. They pushed until they got a reaction, fed on the fear or anger of others to fuel their own sense of superiority. "Perhaps," Skatar continued, his voice growing louder, "humans are only good for 2 things: dying in battle or cleaning up the messes that real warriors leave behind. Which are you, little human? A failed soldier or just a natural-born servant?" The gathering crowd grew larger. Marcus could see humans among them now, some of the maintenance crew and off-duty soldiers. Their faces showed a mixture of sympathy and embarrassment. They knew Marcus was being humiliated, but challenging a Zephyrian commander could have serious consequences for all of them. Marcus set down his cleaning supplies carefully, straightening to his full height. At 6 feet tall, he was still dwarfed by the alien commander, but something in his posture changed. The submissive slump of his shoulders vanished, replaced by a stance that spoke of controlled readiness. "Commander," Marcus said quietly. "I think there's been a misunderstanding." Skatar laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the metal walls. "What misunderstanding? You are a janitor. I am a warrior. The difference is clear to everyone here." "The misunderstanding," Marcus continued in the same calm tone, is that you think what someone does defines who they are. Does it not? Escatar stepped closer, using his superior height to loom over the human. You clean toilets and sweep floors. That is what you are, a cleaner, nothing more. Marcus nodded slowly. You're right about one thing. I do clean toilets and sweep floors. I also change air filters, repair atmospheric processors, and maintain the environmental systems that keep this station livable. Without people like me, this entire facility would be uninhabitable within a week. Menial tasks. Escatar dismissed with a wave of his clawed hand. Essential tasks, Marcus corrected. But you're also wrong about something important. What I do now isn't what I've always done. And what I've done in the past, well, that's not really relevant to keeping your living quarters clean, is it? There was something in the human's voice now. A subtle shift that made several of the watching aliens step back unconsciously. Escatar, however, was too caught up in his own performance to notice the change. Enlighten me, little human, the Zephyrian commander sneered. What could you have possibly done that would impress a warrior like me? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant as if remembering something far away. When he spoke again, his voice was soft, almost conversational. Have you ever heard of the Battle of Kepler 442b, Commander? The question seemed to come from nowhere, and Escatar's expression showed confusion. The human colony defense? 3 years ago, of course. The humans held off a hive incursion with minimal forces. Impressive for your species, though hardly legendary. Marcus nodded. Minimal forces. 300 human marines against 10,000 hive warriors. The entire colony population was evacuated, but someone had to hold the line long enough for the transport ships to reach safety. A heroic last stand, Escatar agreed grudgingly, though I fail to see what this has to do with your current station in life. Marcus picked up his cleaning supplies again, but his movements were different now. More precise, more controlled. The watching crowd had grown completely silent. I was there, Commander. On Kepler 442b. The words hit the gathered crowd like a physical blow. Conversations stopped mid-sentence throughout the corridor, as beings of a dozen different species turned to stare at the quiet human janitor. The Battle of Kepler 442b was legendary throughout the Alliance, not just among humans but among all member species. It had become a textbook example of tactical brilliance and desperate courage. Escatar's confident smirk faltered for the first time. You were there? In what capacity? Maintenance crew for the evacuation ships? Marcus continued organizing his cleaning supplies with methodical precision, but there was something different about him now. The way he moved spoke of muscle memory from a different kind of training. Movements that had nothing to do with pushing mop buckets and everything to do with survival under fire. I was part of the defense force, Marcus said simply. One of the 300. The silence that followed was deafening. Every military being in the Alliance knew the statistics from Kepler 442b. 300 human marines had faced impossible odds against a hive swarm that should have overrun them in minutes. Instead, they had held their positions for 18 hours, buying time for 40,000 colonists to escape. Most remarkably, 73 of those Marines had survived the battle. It was unprecedented in the history of warfare against the hive. The insectoid aliens were relentless, fearless, and utterly without mercy. They swarmed their enemies with overwhelming numbers, accepting massive casualties to achieve their objectives. No force that small had ever held against them for more than an hour. Commander Escatar's yellow eyes narrowed as he studied Marcus with new attention. You claim to be a survivor of Kepler 442b? Prove it. Marcus finally looked up from his cart, meeting the alien's gaze directly. What would you like me to prove, Commander? That I was there? That I fought? That I watched good people die while trying to hold a line that should have broken in the first 10 minutes? Anyone can claim to be a war hero, Escatar said, but there was less certainty in his voice now. Where is your proof? Your medals? Your recognition? In a storage unit back on Earth, Marcus replied quietly. Along with everything else from my old life. A new voice entered the conversation. Lieutenant Sarah Kim, one of the human officers stationed on Omega 7, had pushed through the crowd. She looked pale as she stared at Marcus. Oh my God, she whispered. You're Marcus Chen, Gunnery Sergeant Marcus Chen. The name rippled through the crowd like electricity. Even non-humans recognized it now. Marcus Chen's tactical innovations during the battle had been studied in military academies across the Alliance. His improvised defense strategies had revolutionized thinking about small unit tactics against overwhelming odds. Marcus closed his eyes briefly, as if the recognition physically pained him. "That was a long time ago, Lieutenant. You held Hill 247, Lieutenant Kim continued, her voice growing stronger. "For 6 hours. Alone. After your entire squad was—" She stopped, realizing she was speaking about events that clearly still caused Marcus pain. Escatar's posture had changed completely. The arrogant swagger was gone, replaced by the rigid attention of a soldier recognizing a superior warrior. Among the Zephyrians, combat prowess was the ultimate measure of worth, and the human standing before him had achieved something his own people considered impossible. "You are the one they call the Ghost of Kepler 442b, Escatar said slowly. "The human who disappeared from the battlefield only to reappear behind enemy lines. The one who single-handedly destroyed 3 Hive command clusters." Marcus's jaw tightened. "The Ghost of Kepler 442b died on that hill, Commander. I'm just a janitor now." "But why?" The question came from Captain Vexhai, a 4-armed Altarian who had been listening from the edge of the crowd. "Why would a warrior of your caliber choose such work? Among my people, heroes are honored for life." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his hands stilling on his cleaning supplies. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight that made even the battle-hardened aliens in the crowd lean forward to listen. "Because I learned something on that hill that all my tactical training never taught me. I learned that every life lost under your command becomes part of you. Every decision you make echoes in the screams of the wounded and the silence of the dead." He straightened up, and for a moment, the watching crowd could see the officer he had once been. The quiet authority, the steady presence that had held a line against impossible odds. 47 good Marines died following my orders on Kepler 442b. 47 people who trusted me to bring them home. I saved 40,000 colonists, yes, but I lost 47 soldiers. That math never balances, no matter how many medals they pin on your chest or how many times people call you a hero. Lieutenant Kim stepped forward. "Sergeant Chen, those people died protecting innocents. They died as soldiers doing their duty. You can't blame yourself for—" "Can't I?" Marcus interrupted gently. "Every tactical decision I made cost lives. Every brilliant strategy was paid for in blood. Yes, we won. Yes, we saved the colony. But the price? The price was too high." Commander Sektar found himself in an unfamiliar position. As a Zephyrian, he had been raised to value victory above all else. The concept of a warrior feeling guilt over necessary sacrifices was alien to his mindset. Yet he could see the genuine pain in the human's eyes. "So you became a janitor," Sektar said, trying to understand. "To escape the responsibility of command?" Marcus shook his head. "To find a different kind of purpose. Here I keep things clean and functional. I maintain systems that protect lives instead of ending them. It's honest work that helps people without putting anyone at risk." "But your talents are wasted," protested Captain Vexhai. "The Alliance needs warriors like you. Your tactical knowledge could save countless lives in future conflicts." "My tactical knowledge already saved countless lives," Marcus replied. "And it cost me everything that mattered. My team, my confidence, my ability to sleep through the night without seeing their faces. I gave everything I had to give as a soldier. Now I'm trying to figure out how to live as something else." The crowd was beginning to disperse, but slowly, reluctantly. The revelation had shaken many of them. Here was a living legend, one of the most celebrated warriors in recent Alliance history, and he was cleaning their floors every day. Escatar remained, studying Marcus with new eyes. The arrogance was completely gone now, replaced by something that might have been respect. "I owe you an apology," the Zephyrian commander said formally. "I spoke without knowledge, and my words were unworthy." Marcus picked up his cart handles again. "No apology necessary, Commander. You saw a janitor and treated him like a janitor. That's exactly what I wanted. But you are not just a janitor." "Yes," Marcus said quietly. "I am. That's all I am now, and that's all I want to be." Word spread through Station Omega-7 like wildfire. Within hours, every being on the massive facility knew that the quiet human janitor was actually Marcus Chen, the legendary Ghost of Kepler 442b. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Marcus tried to maintain his normal routine, but it proved impossible. Everywhere he went, conversations stopped. Aliens who had never acknowledged his existence now watched his every movement with something approaching reverence. Some tried to approach him, seeking stories or tactical advice, but Marcus politely declined and continued his work. The attention made him deeply uncomfortable. He had chosen his current life specifically to escape the weight of his reputation, and now that weight had found him again. Commander Siskatar, meanwhile, was experiencing his own crisis. The Zephyrian warrior had built his identity around being the apex predator, the ultimate soldier. Discovering that he had publicly humiliated someone whose combat record made his own achievements look ordinary was devastating to his self-image. Worse, he was beginning to understand the depth of his error. As reports filtered in from other personnel, Eskatar learned more about the human he had insulted. Marcus Chen hadn't just been a good soldier. He had been a tactical genius whose innovations were still being taught in military academies across the galaxy. The Battle of Kepler 4482b had been studied extensively by Zephyrian military analysts. They had concluded that holding against such odds was theoretically impossible, which made the human achievement all the more remarkable. The fact that Chen had walked away from all of that to become a maintenance worker spoke to a complexity of character that Skatar was struggling to comprehend. 3 days after the confrontation, Seskatar found Marcus working in the station's atmospheric processing center. The human was performing routine maintenance on one of the massive air recycling units. His movements efficient and methodical. "Chen," Skatar called out, using the formal address he would give to any respected warrior. Marcus looked up from his work, a slight frown crossing his face. "Just Marcus, please. Or the janitor, if you prefer. I'm not Gunnery Sergeant Chen anymore." Skatar approached carefully, his usual aggressive swagger replaced by something more respectful. "I have been thinking about our conversation. About what you said regarding the price of command." Marcus returned to his work, adjusting a complex array of filters. "And? I do not understand it," Skatar admitted. "Among my people, victory justifies any cost. A commander who saves 40,000 lives at the cost of 47 would be celebrated as a hero without reservation. Maybe that's the difference between our species," Marcus replied without looking up. "Humans have a saying, 'No man left behind.' It's not just a military motto for us. It's a philosophy. Every loss matters, even when the greater good demands sacrifice." Eskatar considered this. But by that logic, no military action would ever be acceptable. Soldiers de invar. It is the nature of conflict. Marcus's hand stilled on his tools. "You're right. Soldiers do die in war. Good people make the ultimate sacrifice for causes greater than themselves. I respect that, and I don't dishonor their memory by questioning their choice." He turned to face the alien commander directly. "What I question is my right to make that choice for them. My right to spend their lives like currency to purchase victory." "Yet you did purchase victory," Skatar pointed out. 40,000 civilians lived because of your choices." "Yes," Marcus acknowledged. "And 47 Marines died because of my choices. Both things are true. The question is whether I can live with that balance." Skatar's reptilian features showed confusion. "So you chose to become a janitor instead of facing that question again?" "I chose to find a way to serve that doesn't require me to sacrifice other people's lives," Marcus corrected. "Here I maintain systems that keep people safe and healthy. I contribute to the mission without having to send anyone into harm's way." A new voice interrupted their conversation. Admiral Thorne, the station commander, had entered the atmospheric processing center with a small entourage of officers. The elderly human's face was grim as he approached. "Chen," Admiral Thorne said formally, "I need to speak with you." Marcus straightened, automatically falling into military posture despite himself. "Admiral, we have a situation. Long-range sensors have detected a Hive scout fleet approaching our sector. 3 days out, moving fast." The words sent a chill through everyone present. The Hive hadn't been seen in this region for over a year, and their sudden appearance meant trouble. "How many ships?" Marcus asked, his voice taking on a different quality. 14 confirmed vessels, mix of scouts and light assault craft. Intelligence suggests they're probing for weak points in our defensive grid." Marcus nodded slowly. "Standard doctrine would be to fall back and call for reinforcements from the core worlds. Standard doctrine assumes we have time for reinforcements to arrive," Admiral Thorne replied grimly. "We don't. There are 17 civilian stations and 3 colonial outposts in this sector. If we fall back, they'll be defenseless. Escatar listened to this exchange with growing understanding. He could see the change in Marcus, the way the human's posture straightened, how his eyes took on a calculating gleam. The janitor was disappearing, replaced by the tactical mind that had saved Kepler 442b. "What's our defensive strength?" Marcus asked. "2 heavy cruisers, 4 destroyers, and our fighter squadrons, plus the station's fixed defenses." Marcus was quiet for a moment, his mind clearly working through scenarios. "That's not enough for a conventional engagement. The Hive will use swarm tactics to overwhelm individual ships." "I know," Admiral Thorne said quietly. "That's why I'm here. I need the ghost of Kepler 442b, not Marcus the janitor." The request hung in the air between them. Marcus closed his eyes, and for a moment Skatar could see the internal struggle playing out on his features. "Admiral," Marcus said slowly, "I left that life behind for good reasons." "I know, and I respect those reasons. But right now, 17 civilian installations and over 2 million innocent lives are depending on the defensive grid we're anchored to. I need your tactical expertise." Marcus was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "If I do this, if I take on tactical planning responsibilities, people will die because of my decisions. People under my command, maybe civilians if I make the wrong call." "People will definitely die if you don't," Admiral Thorne replied bluntly. "The question is how many, and whether they'll be our people or innocent civilians." Escatar found himself holding his breath. He was witnessing something profound. A warrior being called back to battle, facing the demons that had driven him away in the first place. Marcus opened his eyes and looked directly at Admiral Thorne. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" "Coordinate our defense. Plan our strategy. Use that brilliant tactical mind to find a way to stop 14 hive ships with what we have available." "And if my plan costs lives?" Admiral Thorne's expression softened slightly. "Then those lives will be lost in service of saving millions of others." "It's not fair, Marcus. Command never is, but it's necessary." Marcus looked around the atmospheric processing center, at the equipment he had been maintaining, at the simple, honest work that had given him peace. Then he looked at Commander Skatar, who was watching him with intense curiosity. "How long do I have to plan?" Marcus asked. 36 hours until they reach engagement range." Marcus nodded slowly. "I'll need access to all tactical data, fleet dispositions, and station schematics. And I'll need to coordinate with all ship commanders." "Done." "Thank you, Marcus." As Admiral Thorne and his officers left, Skatar remained behind. He watched as Marcus carefully cleaned and stored his maintenance tools, each movement deliberate and final. "You are returning to war," Skatar observed. "For now," Marcus replied, "hopefully just this once." "Do you regret the Admiral's request?" Marcus considered the question carefully. "I regret the necessity of it. But you were right about one thing, Commander. I am a warrior. That's who I am, regardless of what job I choose to do. The question is whether I can be the kind of warrior who saves lives instead of just taking them." The transformation was remarkable to witness. Within hours of accepting Admiral Thorne's request, Marcus Chen had shed the quiet demeanor of a maintenance worker and emerged as something entirely different. He moved through the station's command center with purpose, his eyes taking in tactical displays with the sharp focus of a predator analyzing prey. Commander Skatar had requested permission to observe the planning process, citing his expertise in assault tactics. In truth, he was fascinated by the opportunity to watch a legendary human strategist at work. Admiral Thorne had granted the request, and now the Zephyrian found himself witnessing something unprecedented. Marcus stood before a massive holographic display showing the approaching hive fleet. The alien ships moved in their characteristic swarm formation, a cloud of vessels that could rapidly disperse to attack multiple targets or converge to overwhelm a single point of defense. "Standard hive tactics," Marcus murmured, his fingers dancing across the control interface to zoom in on individual ships. "They'll probe our defenses first, looking for weak points. Once they identify our response patterns, they'll concentrate their full force on whatever they perceive as our weakest link." Captain Elena Vasquez, the station's tactical officer, nodded grimly. "Our simulation suggests they'll focus on either the civilian evacuation routes or try to disable the station's main defensive array." "Both," Marcus corrected. "They'll force us to choose between protecting the civilians and protecting ourselves." Classic hive psychology. They understand that humans will sacrifice military assets to save civilian lives. Admiral Thorne studied the display. So what do you recommend? We can't abandon the civilians, but if we lose the station, the entire sector falls. Marcus was quiet for several minutes, his mind working through scenarios. Escatar watched the human's face, noting the subtle changes in expression as different possibilities were considered and discarded. We don't fight them, Marcus said finally. What? Captain Vasquez looked shocked. Chen, we can't just run. There are millions of lives at stake. I didn't say we run, Marcus replied calmly. I said we don't fight them. Not the way they expect us to fight them. He manipulated the holographic display, highlighting the space around the station. The hive excels at direct confrontation. They overwhelm through superior numbers and relentless aggression. But they have weaknesses, such as… Admiral Thorne leaned forward, intrigued. They're predictable. Their tactics haven't changed in centuries because they've never needed to change them. They win through brute force, so they never developed tactical flexibility. Marcus zoomed in on one of the approaching hive ships. They also have a fundamental blind spot in their thinking. They assume all species think like they do, that everyone values individual survival above collective goals. Skatar's eyes narrowed. You are planning to use their assumptions against them. Exactly. Marcus turned to face the assembled officers. We're going to convince them that they've already won. The next 18 hours were a masterclass in military planning. Marcus worked with barely any sleep, coordinating with ship commanders, reviewing technical specifications, and refining a strategy that was so unconventional it bordered on insane. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. When the hive fleet arrived, they would find Station Omega-7 apparently defenseless. The human fleet would appear to have fled, leaving only minimal defenses and a skeleton crew aboard the station. The hive would see easy prey and move in for a quick victory. What they wouldn't see was the trap being set for them. You want us to hide our entire fleet inside the asteroid belt? Captain Torres of the cruiser Defiant looked skeptical. Chen, those asteroids are barely big enough to hide a fighter, let alone a capital ship. We're not hiding behind the asteroids, Marcus explained patiently. We're hiding inside them. He brought up a detailed scan of the nearest asteroid cluster. These aren't solid rock. They're mostly ice and loose debris held together by weak gravitational fields. With careful maneuvering, our ships can hollow out temporary shelters. The hive sensors won't be able to distinguish between a ship-sized cavity and natural variations in density. It's insane, Captain Vasquez muttered. One wrong move and we'll be crushed. But it could work, Admiral Thorne said slowly. The hive has never encountered this tactic because no one's ever been desperate enough to try it. Marcus nodded. Desperation breeds innovation. They'll expect us to either run or fight conventionally. They won't expect us to essentially play dead. Commander Escatar had remained largely silent during the planning sessions, but now he spoke up. What of the station itself? They will still attack it. Let them, Marcus replied. We'll evacuate all non-essential personnel to the hidden fleet. The skeleton crew that remains will put up token resistance before abandoning the station. And then… Marcus's smile was cold. Then we wait. The hive will board the station to secure it, concentrating their forces in a confined space. That's when we spring the trap. The details were complex and required precise timing. Hidden charges would be placed throughout the station's less critical sections. When the hive forces boarded, they would find what appeared to be a normal space station with standard defensive measures. They would spread through the corridors, securing sections according to their standard protocols. What they wouldn't realize was that the station itself had been turned into the ultimate weapon. The atmospheric processing systems can be modified to create localized gravitational distortions, Marcus explained to the engineering teams. Not enough to damage the station's structure, but enough to disrupt hive ship formations when they're clustered around the docking bays. Chief Engineer Morrison looked worried. Chen, if we miscalculate those distortions, we could tear the station apart. If we don't try this, the hive will tear the station apart anyway, Marcus replied. At least this way we take them with us. Escatar found himself more impressed with each passing hour. The human strategy was unlike anything he had ever encountered. Where Zephyrian tactics relied on overwhelming force and aggression, Marcus was using misdirection and the enemy's own assumptions as weapons. You fight like a predator, Skatar told Marcus during a brief break in the planning. but not like any predator I have known. Marcus looked up from the tactical display. How so? Most predators rely on strength, speed, or natural weapons. You rely on making your prey believe they are the predator. Humans learned long ago that being the biggest or strongest doesn't guarantee survival, Marcus replied. Sometimes the best way to win is to make your enemy defeat themselves. Is this how you won at Kepler 442b? Marcus's expression darkened slightly. Kepler 442b was different. There we had to hold ground against impossible odds. Here we have space to maneuver and the element of surprise. But the principle is the same, Skatar observed. You use the enemy's strengths against them. Every enemy has weaknesses, Marcus agreed. The key is finding them and exploiting them without getting killed in the process. As the final preparations were made, word of the plan spread through the station. The response was mixed. Some crew members thought it was brilliant, others thought it was suicide. But everyone understood that conventional tactics wouldn't work against the approaching Hive fleet. Lieutenant Kim approached Marcus as he was making final adjustments to the gravitational distortion systems. Marcus, the crew is asking if you really think this will work. Marcus paused in his work. It should work. The mathematics are sound, the timing is achievable, and the Hive's behavioral patterns support our assumptions. That's not what I asked. Marcus straightened up and looked at her directly. No plan survives contact with the enemy, Lieutenant. All we can do is stack the odds in our favor and hope that when everything goes wrong, we're still in a better position than they are. And if it doesn't work, then we'll have died fighting for something worthwhile, Marcus replied simply. That's all any soldier can ask for. As the Hive fleet approached the edge of sensor range, Marcus took one last look around the command center. In a few hours, he would once again be responsible for the lives of everyone under his command. The weight of that responsibility settled on his shoulders like a familiar, unwelcome burden. But this time he had a plan that might just save everyone. This time, he might get the math right. The Hive fleet dropped out of hyperspace exactly where Marcus had predicted they would. 14 ships materialized in the void, their organic-looking hulls pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that served as their form of communication. To human eyes, they looked like massive insects, all chitin and angles built for one purpose, overwhelming their prey through sheer numbers and relentless aggression. Marcus watched from the station's backup command center, a small heavily shielded room deep in the station's core. Most of the station's crew had been evacuated to the hidden fleet, leaving only 50 volunteers to help execute the deception. Among them was Commander Skatar, who had insisted on remaining to observe the battle firsthand. Phase 1 is working perfectly, reported Lieutenant Kim from her position at the sensor station. The Hive is reading exactly what we want them to read. On the main display, the tactical situation looked grim for the defenders. Station Omega 7 appeared to be operating with minimal power, its defensive systems running at barely 20% capacity. The human fleet was nowhere to be seen, and emergency broadcasts were being transmitted on standard frequencies, requesting immediate evacuation assistance. To the Hive, it looked like they had caught their prey completely off guard. Hive ships are moving into standard attack formation, Kim continued. They're spreading out to surround the station just like you predicted. Marcus nodded, his eyes fixed on the display. They're being cautious. They know this could be a trap, but they can't resist such an apparently easy target. The Hive commander was no fool. The alien ships approached slowly, sending out scout drones to probe for hidden defenses or cloaked vessels. When the drones found nothing but empty space and a few scattered pieces of debris, the main fleet began to close in. They're taking the bait. Admiral Thorne's voice crackled over the secure comm channel from his position with the hidden fleet. All ships report ready for Phase 2. Not yet, Marcus replied calmly. Let them get closer. We need them committed to the attack before we reveal ourselves. Skatar watched the human commander with fascination, where the Zephyrian would have been pacing, snarling orders and preparing for immediate combat. Marcus remained perfectly still. His hands were steady, his breathing controlled, his entire demeanor radiating calm confidence. The first Hive energy blast struck the station's outer hull, deliberately aimed at non-critical sections to maintain the illusion of a struggling defense. The station shuddered under the impact, and emergency lights flickered throughout the corridors. Damage control teams report successful simulation of hull breaches in sections 7 through 12, came a report from one of the volunteers. Where reading is heavily damaged but not critically compromised. Perfect, Marcus replied. Begin Phase 2. All non-essential systems offline. Emergency power only. Make it look like we're about to lose life support. The station's power signature dropped dramatically, and the hive response was immediate. Seeing their prey apparently on the verge of collapse, they abandoned caution and moved in for the kill. All 14 ships converged on the station, their formation tightening as they prepared for boarding operations. Hive boarding pods launching, Kim reported. 36 pods inbound, each carrying approximately 20 warriors. Marcus's jaw tightened. 700 hive soldiers would be swarming through the station within minutes. Even with the traps he had prepared, that was a terrifying number of enemies to face with only 50 defenders. All teams to positions, he ordered. Remember, we only need to hold them for 10 minutes. After that, the cavalry arrives. The first boarding pod slammed into the station's hull with tremendous force, their drill-like tips boring through armor plating to deliver their deadly cargo. Immediately, the sound of cutting tools echoed through the corridors as hive warriors began forcing their way inside. Marcus activated the internal monitoring systems, watching as the aliens poured into the station. They moved with the frightening efficiency of a species that had perfected the art of boarding actions over countless millennia. Each warrior was heavily armed and armored, their insectoid forms designed for close-quarters combat. Contact in Section 4, reported Corporal Martinez over the comm. 6 hive warriors. Engaging now. The sound of weapons fire echoed through the corridors, punctuated by the inhuman screeching of the alien invaders. Marcus tracked the battle on his displays, watching as his small teams fell back according to plan, drawing the hive forces deeper into the station. They're following the predicted routes, he observed with satisfaction. All teams begin Phase 3. Start the withdrawal to secondary positions. The human defenders began what appeared to be a fighting retreat, but was actually a carefully orchestrated maneuver to concentrate the hive forces in specific areas of the station. Marcus had studied the aliens' tactical patterns extensively, and he knew they would pursue aggressively, assuming they had their prey on the run. Esakatar, Marcus called to the Zephyrian commander, your assessment of their boarding tactics? Esakatar had been watching the displays with professional interest. Efficient but predictable. They advance in standard formation, secure each section methodically, and maintain communication with their command vessel. Very disciplined. Too disciplined, Marcus agreed. They're not adapting to our unconventional resistance patterns. That's going to cost them. 5 minutes into the boarding action, Marcus gave the order for Phase 4. Hidden charges detonated throughout the station, not to cause damage but to trigger the modified atmospheric processing systems. Suddenly, the artificial gravity in key sections began fluctuating wildly. The effect on the hive forces was immediate and devastating. Their rigid formations collapsed as warriors found themselves suddenly weightless or crushed against bulkheads by shifting gravity fields. Communication between units became impossible as the distortions interfered with their biological communication systems. Now, Marcus said quietly into his comm, all ships execute Phase 5. Hidden within the asteroid belt, the human fleet powered up their engines and weapons simultaneously. The asteroids that had concealed them exploded outward as the ships burst from their hiding places, engines blazing as they raced toward the confused hive fleet. The hive commander's response was exactly what Marcus had predicted. Caught completely off guard by the sudden appearance of an entire fleet that had been invisible moments before, the alien ships tried to break away from the station to meet this new threat. But they had committed too many forces to the boarding action, and their tight formation around the station made maneuvering difficult. Hive ships are trying to disengage, reported Admiral Thorne from the bridge of his flagship, but they're tangled up in their own formation. Some ships are colliding as they try to turn. Target their command ship first, Marcus ordered. Take out their coordination and the rest will scatter. The human fleet struck with surgical precision. Months of training and preparation paid off as each ship knew exactly where to be and when to be there. The Hive, masters of overwhelming force, found themselves outmaneuvered by an enemy they had assumed was already defeated. The largest Hive vessel, a massive bioship that served as their command center, took concentrated fire from 3 human cruisers simultaneously. Its organic armor, designed to regenerate from minor damage, couldn't cope with the focused assault. The ship's bioluminescent communication patterns flickered and died as critical systems failed. Command ship is down, Thorne reported with satisfaction. The rest of the fleet is breaking formation. But the battle wasn't over. Inside the station, Marcus still had to deal with 700 Hive warriors who were now trapped but very much alive and angry. The gravity distortions had disrupted their advance, but they were already adapting, using magnetic clamps and personal thrusters to maintain mobility in the chaotic environment. All teams, final phase, Marcus ordered. Fall back to the central core. Time to spring the last trap. The human defenders retreated to a heavily fortified section of the station's core, drawing the Hive forces into a single, concentrated area. As the aliens pressed their attack, convinced they were about to overwhelm the last pocket of resistance, Marcus activated his final surprise. The atmospheric processing system, already modified to create gravity distortions, was pushed to its absolute limits. Instead of random fluctuations, Marcus created a single, massive gravitational pulse that radiated outward from the station's core. The effect was spectacular. Every Hive warrior within the station was suddenly subjected to crushing gravitational forces that slammed them against bulkheads, floors, and ceilings. Their insectoid forms, adapted for low-gravity environments, couldn't withstand the intense pressure. Outside the station, the gravitational pulse struck the remaining Hive ships like an invisible hammer. Vessels that had been trying to escape found their hulls buckling under forces they had never been designed to handle. 3 ships were destroyed instantly, while the others suffered critical damage that left them dead in space. This is impossible, Janitor breathed, watching the destruction unfold on the displays. You turned the entire station into a weapon. Marcus slumped back in his chair, suddenly looking exhausted. It was always a weapon, Commander. All space stations are by their very nature. I just figured out how to use it effectively. The cleanup took another 2 hours. The human fleet systematically destroyed the remaining Hive vessels while damage control teams swept through the station, dealing with the few alien survivors. The casualties were remarkably light. 12 human dead, 37 wounded compared to the complete annihilation of the Hive force. As reports came in from across the sector, the scope of the victory became clear. Not only had they saved Station Omega-7, but they had eliminated the Hive scouting force before it could report back on human defensive capabilities. The alien threat to this sector had been neutralized completely. Admiral Thorne arrived at the backup command center as Marcus was reviewing the final casualty reports. The older man's face showed a mixture of relief, pride, and concern. Brilliant work, Marcus, Thorne said simply. You saved millions of lives today. Marcus looked up from the reports, his eyes haunted. 12 good people died following my orders, Admiral. 12 people who trusted me to bring them home safely. And if you hadn't taken command, those 12 people would be dead anyway, along with everyone else on this station and probably half the civilian population in this sector. Thorne replied firmly. You made the hard choices that needed to be made. I know, Marcus said quietly. That doesn't make it easier to live with. Janitor stepped forward, his reptilian features showing an expression the human had never seen before, something that might have been humility. I understand now, the Zephyrian said. Why you chose to become a janitor, why you walked away from command, the weight of those choices. It is heavier than any physical burden. Marcus nodded. Every commander carries the ghosts of everyone they've lost. The question is whether you can bear that weight and still function, or whether it crushes you. And which are you? Janitor asked. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, staring at the tactical display that showed the debris field where the Hive fleet had been. I'm still figuring that out. 3 weeks after the battle, Station Omega-7 had returned to something resembling normal operations. The damaged sections had been repaired, new crew members had arrived to replace those lost in the fighting, and the regular rhythm of military life had resumed. But for Marcus Chen, nothing would ever be quite the same. He sat in Admiral Thorne's office, staring out the viewport at the stars beyond. The debris field from the destroyed Hive fleet had been cleared away, leaving no visible trace of the battle that had taken place. It was as if the entire engagement had been nothing more than a bad dream. The Alliance Command wants to promote you to Admiral, Thorne said, breaking the comfortable silence. Full Fleet Command, your choice of assignment. They're calling the defense of Omega-7 one of the most brilliant tactical victories in recent history. Marcus didn't respond immediately. He had been expecting this conversation for days, dreading it in many ways. The weight of expectation that came with recognition was something he had hoped to leave behind forever. "I appreciate the offer, Admiral," he said finally, "but I think we both know my answer." Thorn nodded slowly. "I figured as much. But I had to make the offer official. The Alliance doesn't often produce tactical minds like yours, Marcus. It seems wasteful to have you cleaning floors when you could be saving worlds." "I did save a world," Marcus replied quietly, "and 12 people died because of my decisions. That's a ratio I can live with, but it's not one I want to test again if I can avoid it." "So you're going back to janitorial work?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, considering. "Actually, I was thinking about something different. Chief Morrison mentioned that the station needs someone to supervise the atmospheric processing systems. It's technical work, important to keeping everyone alive, but it doesn't involve sending people into combat." Thorn smiled slightly. "Environmental Systems Supervisor. That's quite a step down from Admiral. Or quite a step up from Janitor," Marcus countered. "It's honest work that makes a difference." "That's all I need." The Admiral leaned back in his chair, studying the younger man. "You know, there's something I never told you about why I specifically requested your help with the Hive situation." Marcus looked up. "Curious, it wasn't just because of your tactical skills," Thorn continued. "It was because of what you did after Kepler 442b. When you walked away from command, when you chose to find a different way to serve, you proved something important." "Which was?" "That true strength isn't about how much power you can wield. It's about knowing when not to use that power." Thorn stood up, moving to look out the viewport. "Most officers with your capabilities would have stayed in command, convinced they were indispensable. You had the wisdom to recognize your own limitations and make a choice that was right for you." Marcus considered this. "I'm not sure wisdom had anything to do with it. I think it was more like survival instinct. Maybe. But the result is the same. You found a way to serve without compromising your principles or your peace of mind. That's not weakness, Marcus. That's remarkable strength." A chime at the door interrupted their conversation. "Enter," Thorn called. Commander Seskatar stepped into the office, his usual aggressive bearing tempered by something that looked like respect. "Admiral, Marcus, I apologize for interrupting, but I wanted to speak with you before my reassignment." "Where are they sending you?" Marcus asked. "Assault Command training on Zephyr Prime," Skatar replied. "But that is not why I am here." He turned to face Marcus directly. "I wanted to thank you." Marcus looked surprised. "For what?" "For teaching me something about strength that my people have never understood." Eskatar's reptilian features were serious as he continued. "We Zephyrians believe that might makes right, that the strongest warrior deserves command. But watching you these past weeks, I have learned that real strength sometimes means walking away from the fight. I'm not sure I follow." "You could have any command in the Alliance," Siktar explained. "You could lead fleets, conquer worlds, build an empire of military glory. Instead, you choose to maintain air recycling systems. By our standards, that should make you weak. But I have seen what you can accomplish when you choose to fight. The fact that you usually choose not to fight, that makes you more dangerous than any warrior I have ever known." Marcus was quiet for a moment, processing this perspective. "I never thought of it that way." "Because you are not trying to be dangerous," Siktar observed. "You're trying to be useful. That is what makes you so formidable. You use violence as a tool, not as an identity." The Zephyrian commander straightened into a formal military posture. "It has been an honor to serve alongside you, Marcus Chen. When the stories of this battle are told on my homeworld, I will make sure they understand that the greatest human warrior is one who chose to become a janitor." After Siktar left, Marcus and Admiral Thorn sat in comfortable silence for several minutes. Finally, Thorn spoke. "He's not wrong, you know, about the stories that will be told. Word of what happened here is already spreading through the Alliance. You're going to be famous again, whether you want to be or not." Marcus sighed. "I was afraid of that. But maybe this time will be different," Thorn suggested. "Maybe this time, the story won't just be about the brilliant tactics or the impossible victory. Maybe it will be about a warrior who knew when to put down his sword, and when to pick it up again," Marcus added. "Exactly." Marcus stood up, preparing to leave. "Admiral, I have one request about my new position. I want to keep my janitorial duties, too. Part-time. The station still needs someone to maintain the areas that the automated systems can't handle." Thorn looked puzzled. "Marcus, you'll be supervising critical environmental systems. That's a full-time job. You don't need to clean floors anymore." It's not about need, Marcus explained. It's about remembering who I am when I'm not making life and death decisions. The janitorial work keeps me grounded, keeps me connected to the simple reality of maintaining things instead of destroying them. If that's what you want. It is. Marcus headed for the door, then paused. Admiral, thank you for giving me the choice. You could have ordered me back into command. I could have, Thorne agreed. But I learned something from watching you work. Sometimes the best way to lead is to let people find their own path. Marcus left the Admiral's office and made his way back to the environmental systems section. His new workspace was significantly more complex than a janitor's closet. Filled with sophisticated monitoring equipment and control systems that regulated the atmosphere for thousands of people. But in the corner, he had kept a small cleaning cart. Not because he needed it for his new job, but because it reminded him of the choice he had made to serve in whatever way was needed, without ego or ambition driving his decisions. Lieutenant Kim found him there an hour later, studying atmospheric composition readouts with the same intensity he had once brought to tactical analysis. Settling in well? She asked. Getting there, Marcus replied. It's different from combat planning, but there are similarities. Both jobs are about keeping people alive. The crew has been talking, Kim said, about what you did during the battle, and about your decision to stay here instead of taking a promotion. What are they saying? That they're glad you're staying. That they feel safer knowing you're here even if you're not in command. She paused. They're also saying you've redefined what it means to be a hero. Marcus looked up from his displays. How so? Most heroes in the stories charge into battle, save the day, and then ride off into the sunset to find the next adventure. You charged into battle, saved the day, and then went back to making sure the air conditioning works properly. Marcus chuckled. When you put it that way, it does sound pretty anticlimactic. Maybe. Or maybe it's the most heroic thing of all. Choosing to serve without glory, to protect without recognition, to be ready when you're needed but content when you're not. As Kim left, Marcus returned to his work, monitoring the complex systems that kept Station Omega-7 habitable. It was quiet work, methodical and precise, very different from the chaos of combat command. But it was important work, and that was enough. Outside his office window, the stars wheeled slowly through space, indifferent to human struggles and ambitions. Somewhere among those stars, other threats were stirring. Other crises were developing that would require decisive action and tactical brilliance. When those crises came, if they came to his sector, Marcus would be ready. He would pick up the burden of command once again, make the hard choices, and accept responsibility for the consequences. But until that moment arrived, he was content to be what he had chosen to be. A man who maintained the systems that kept people safe, who served without seeking glory, and who had found peace in the simple act of making sure things worked properly. It was, he reflected, exactly the kind of hero the galaxy needed. One who was powerful enough to save worlds, but wise enough to know that sometimes the most important battles were fought with cleaning supplies and atmospheric processors. In the end, Marcus Chen had learned the most important lesson any warrior could master, that true strength lay not in the ability to destroy, but in the choice of when and how to use that ability in service of others. And in a universe full of threats and challenges, that kind of strength was the most valuable asset of all.